Over the last 3 years, the tech sector constructed a trillion-dollar narrative around generative AI. But underneath the hype, that financial foundation is fracturing. We are watching the most highly capitalized companies in modern corporate history rapidly deplete their cash reserves, struggling to sustain operations despite their massive valuations. For the institutional researchers and industry critics who identified this structural flaw early, this moment represents the vindication hour. To understand why this is happening, we have to strip away the promises of artificial general intelligence and conduct a strict financial audit. What that audit reveals is an irreconcilable gap. The physical infrastructure required to run generative AI carries a massive, permanent debt, and the current commercial software models cannot generate the revenue required to pay for it. This reality surfaced abruptly when major AI networks, including OpenAI, implemented drastic cuts to their API pricing. Industry boosters immediately claimed these discounts were the result of sudden breakthroughs in computing efficiency. But the hardware specifications of the chips required to run these models tell a different story. The physical complexity and fixed costs of these systems have not changed. The actual catalyst for these discounts was massive enterprise churn. Corporate clients realized they were burning through budgets in a matter of months and began flatly refusing to renew early contracts, effectively taking their vendors hostage. When an AI lab cuts its prices by 50%, their physical operating expenses do not magically drop by half. They are simply taking a larger loss on every query. An enterprise software company forced to heavily discount its core product just months after pushing clients to real usage rates signals a broken business model. Silicon Valley investors made a fatal miscalculation. They treated artificial intelligence compute costs like traditional software as a service, assuming zero marginal cost distribution. Traditional software is written once and distributed infinitely. Generative AI requires heavy physical processing power to generate tokens for every single prompt. Every query burns capital in real time. This chart shows a $20 subscription. When a user consumes 25% of their limit, gross margins crash red. At 50%, the math breaks completely, hitting negative 775%. 35 idle users must subsidize just one person hitting their cap. The numbers dictate that generative AI networks essentially pay their enterprise clients to use the software. Apply those negative margins to enterprise accounts with thousands of engineers generating code, and the losses scale disastrously. Compounding the cost is the fact that corporate risk managers cannot actually measure the return on investment for these tasks. There is no linear way to calculate the exact financial value gained from a generated email or a block of AI code. Without clear value metrics, companies face extreme burn rates. Major tech firms blew through their entire annual AI budgets in a single fiscal quarter. This has sparked a revolt inside corporate accounting departments. Account managers are enforcing strict usage caps on their staff and refusing to renew the massive minimum spend contracts demanded by the AI labs. In traditional tech, rapid user adoption guarantees success. In generative AI, heavy usage actively accelerates the financial collapse of the provider. This software-level hemorrhage is happening against the backdrop of a $1.1 trillion financial commitment to physical compute infrastructure. The graphics processing units powering these networks are not permanent assets. They run extremely hot, degrade rapidly under continuous load, and require constant capital-intensive replacement. Maintaining them requires staggering amounts of raw energy and massive specialized cooling systems just to keep the server racks from melting down. Furthermore, the algorithms themselves are hitting a functional ceiling. Pouring more capital and hardware into these data centers is no longer producing the exponential leaps in reasoning capability that investors were promised. This dual-axis chart illustrates the trap. On one side, you have a flatlining, heavily subsidized software revenue stream. On the other, a towering permanent physical debt that demands billions of dollars a month just to service. Data centers originally constructed for an endless hype cycle have become toxic assets, aggressively draining whatever liquidity remains in the market. With private capital drying up, early investors are left with a single survival tactic, rushing these entities toward an initial public offering. To mask the massive operational losses, they're engineering corporate structures that tether failing AI businesses to highly capitalized physical hardware companies. This desperation breeds increasingly absurd infrastructure proposals, like the suggestion to launch data centers into low Earth orbit just to solve the terrestrial cooling constraints. A small handful of executives and billionaires are orchestrating these massive private valuations to try and absorb the shock of the failing margins. These extreme corporate maneuverings do not solve the underlying mathematical flaws. They exist purely to generate exit liquidity for venture capitalists, transferring the toxic debt to public retail investors before the music stops. Internal institutional memos are now explicitly defining 2026 as a period of deep economic stagnation for the sector, marking the exact moment the market recognized the severity of this revenue gap. This chart shows the result: a strategic drawdown by major funds globally, actively cutting their exposure to generative AI infrastructure. To align the sector's current accounting reality with its operational burn rate would require a literal miracle of economics. As the massive structural debt overwhelms any remaining liquid capital, the entire sector faces an unavoidable, systemic collapse. The underlying economics of generative AI never worked. Now the industry is staring down a total systemic liquidation.